Hey everybody, Rob here once again. We're going to continue our look into the What If universe. These were some of my most favorite books as a kid. There was a small window of time where they did some of the coolest stories I've ever read, and we've got a new one to look at. And I dug out the ones to start, the ones that we've already looked at. And the thing about What If stories is telling alternate tales of how different stories that happened in the comics, a different version of them, a different version of them, how it might have gone down if things hadn't gone the way they did in the regular storyline, or just versions of events that never happened at all. We're just seeing, like, what if Wolverine joined Shield, or what if Wolverine faced Conan. I guess I should mention this, not intentional on my part, but to have all these books with Wolverine as a focus, it's just kind of how it worked out. But sometimes these what if stories end on a positive note, sometimes, but most of the time they end on a really like scary, dour, kind of vibe that really makes the story like a big downer. But that's kind of part of the fun of it, like taking a story that you read, but what if it went this really horrible direction? For example, what if X-Men Lost Inferno? I mean, you literally had Wolverine eating babies. And if you've seen my video, you know I'm not exaggerating. But it kind of ended on kind of a positive note with the Phoenix Force coming along and wiping the planet clean of every demon that invaded the world and restoring the planet to a raw, primordial, natural state. The only problem is that the majority of the human population was wiped out, but all the demons were gone, but the planet is like fresh and clean and new, and humanity was able to start over. So that's good. What if Wolverine was an agent of Shield? There were some different character moments in that story that were kind of dark and kind of unfortunate, but it was more a story of Wolverine finding a place that he fit in, and the world actually ended up a better place with him in place of Shield. He helped out the X-Men in a way, in a epilogue at the end of the main story. They explained how he helped out the X-Men, which basically led to them avoiding the horrors of the Phoenix Saga, and he helped bring mutant rights to prominence peacefully, and the world was just a better place with Wolverine as part of Shield. What if Wolverine fought Conan? That actually had two parts that were both good and bad in the worlds they existed in. Wolverine ended up, unfortunately, stuck in the world of Conan, but he ended up running off with Red Sonja and just presumably having great adventures with her until he dies. Conan got swapped with Wolverine. He ended up at the absolute most critical moment of the pinnacle of the Phoenix Saga, and with Wolverine not being there, but Conan it ended up with Phoenix wiping out the universe. So it ended on kind of a bad note for everyone except Wolverine. So those are the three that we've done so far. What one do we have this time? This next one, I say this, it's one of my favorites. They're all one of my favorites. What if Wolverine, oh my God. There's no joke that Wolverine being stuck in my head from all those other ones. Let me start that over. What if the alien costume had possessed Spider-Man? This, I believe, is the first issue of What If that I ever read, because Inferno was issue 6, Agent of Shield was 7, the Wolverine and Conan one, issue 16. So this was the first one that I ever read. And it was the introduction of the black symbiote costume to me. I was aware that Spider-Man, obviously I knew Spider-Man existed as a kid. You can't help but know that he exists. And he had at some point a black costume, and I'd heard the name Venom, but I had not read any of those stories. So this What If was my introduction to the symbiote and the concept of Venom and all those kind of elements, even though what goes on in here is very different from the Venom storyline. But it set a precedent in my head of how cool this thing could be. So let's get into it. Pretty awesome cover. I mean, you got Hulk and Thor pummeling up against possessed Spider-Man's head, and it's not hurting him at all. Pretty interesting. One thing that surprised me is, I've been reading comics for a while and reading a bunch of Spider-Man books, and I've followed artist Mark Bagley on several projects. And he drew this. This is October of '89. I didn't realize it was Mark Bagley until I dug this out and looked at it again for the first time in decades. And like, Mark Bagley drew it. I had no idea. I didn't know he'd been drawing comic books that long. And I didn't realize that he was so goddamn good so long ago. He's been good for years, reliable, consistent. He did 100 straight issues of Ultimate Spider-Man with Bendis in the Ultimate line, which I collected every one of them, and it was great comics. I enjoyed it, every bit of it. And he did big runs on, I think it was Amazing Spider-Man, and helped introduce the Carnage symbiote. A big, long career, and a great artist. But I didn't know it was him drawing this. And having done a quick flip through before I started recording, I noticed something in this that I've noticed once or twice in older books. My memory of these old books is that the impact of the story affected me so much as far as how interesting it was, and the visuals, like certain images, poses, storytelling beats in the book that were so good and so well done that in my mind, the actual physical image was bigger and more exciting on the page until I revisit it. And I'm like, it was not as big on the page, like physically speaking, as it actually is. I don't know if that makes any sense. It's just, I think it's more of a testament to good, clear storytelling, and not devoting your artistic endeavors when drawing a book to doing what became the norm very soon after this with the Image Comics guys, where every page has like an anchor image, if you know what that means, where you draw a page but you always have some big amazing figure of some character on almost every page that makes it interesting to want to resell. For that's one of many reasons why they do it, visually, to make it awesome and interesting. But there's none of that really going on. This is just simple, basic, clear, perfect, classic storytelling. And I'll point it out where there are different images that are in the book that in my head in the past were much more bigger and grandiose than they actually were in the book. And once I revisited, I'm like, that's a little teeny tiny panel, but it works perfectly. Anyway, as with the case with the what ifs, you've got the Watcher, and he's telling you, like, we all know the story of this guy, but what if something different happened? And so they start out retelling the basic story that always happened and existed with Peter Parker and the symbiote costume, how he was, they were off planet. And at this particular time, I guess, I'm not really for sure, but I guess Spider-Man and Felicia Hardy, the Black Cat, they were in a relationship. They were having great times. And they're just basically retelling the story. But this black costume would just, it's alive, and it's oozing onto him while he sleeps, and takes his unconscious body, Peter Parker's unconscious body, out at night, flipping around, to fuel its own thirst for excitement. And Peter keeps waking up exhausted, even though he slept, so he thought, all night. Now again, I have never read the original story of the black costume, and so I presume this is an exact or an accurate retelling of it. But this kind of was like, it's kind of a terrifying concept. Like, it's just a costume as far as you know. You don't know that it's alive, but it's grasping onto you at night and taking you out. So eventually Reed Richards explains to him that it's alive and it's susceptible to sonic vibrations, basically. Like, he uses a sonic blaster and it causes the costume to escape off him. They can contain it, but eventually it got away and dove back onto Spider-Man. And this is an example of the panels where, like, it's not even a quarter of the page, this simple little panel, but the angle, the pose, everything that's going on in this panel, my memory of it was that it was a bigger image, but it's just a little tiny thing. But it's also continuing that, like, scary kind of concept of that costume just grasping onto him. He's trying to tear it off. It shows how he went to, like, a bell tower and the vibrations caused it to eventually just fall off him. So creepy, kind of scary concept, but really cool. But as these comics go, is the Watcher saying, but what if there is a universe, a reality, where they did not remove the costume before it bonded with him permanently? So Venom gets avoided entirely. So it goes into this universe where we don't know it, but the costume has actually bonded with them already. Felicia's noticing that he's off. He's kind of different. He's like, I've been run down. I can't figure out why. So he's trying to figure out what's going on. So he goes to another scientist, and they're looking at it, and they're basically finding out, they're digging more into this costume of what it is and what it's doing to him, and trying to find a solution to take care of it. They get the sonic blaster thing again, but they have to keep using increasingly powerful blasts to get the costume to come off him. Like we saw in this previous page, like Reed Richards is zapping him. Peter's not affected, but the costume just gets off it. It certainly affects him. This one, the costume's coming off him, but it's clearly hurting Peter. So that's not good. But then this is where it started to delve into the, for me as a young reader, getting creepy, because the costume has bonded with Spider-Man. There's no removing it forcibly. And this panel right here, I'm going to bring it close up again, how he's like begging for help and that costume is just consuming him and covering him. That's so creepy. And the costume would then suddenly would start speaking for him. He leaps away like he's going to get away. And Reed Richards gets up there, blasts him again, really hurting him, but at least knocks him out where they can cage him in this whatever glass cage that he's trying to pound his way out of. But the costume is not separate from him. Another great thing that Mark Bagley does, and I remember noticing this when I was reading the Ultimate Spider-Man run, because they did introduce the black costume and a Venom and a Carnage version. And I'd seen the original Carnage version in the Amazing Spider-Man run, but the way that Mark Bagley draws the little costume oozing bits, I really noticed, it really just suddenly became aware to me in the Ultimate Spider-Man run when he was doing Carnage and had him running around and the red parts of his costume just oozing off him. I don't know how else to describe it, but the way that Mark Bagley does this, it works so good, and no one does it as good as him. It looks great. There's a few more examples coming up in the book where this oozing, like rubbery, putty-like costume is illustrated so well. But they, continuing the story, they got him locked away, and so they bring in Doctor Strange to try some magical spells, and he's like, I've been hurling spells at him, it's just not working. Look at this great, it's a little teeny tiny panel, but you can imagine a different artist taking this panel and being a big image, because there's a lot of awesome, energetic, powerful things going on here, but this little tiny panel sells it perfectly. This face I always thought was really creepy. Like the evil that the costume is. Peter's inside there, but that's that evil costume. And you see that he's seeping through the seams of this cage. Eventually, after like relentless pounding, it finally cracks and he gets away, knocks everybody down, and he just takes off and he's free. So they've got to kind of keep working the problem. This is another kind of creepy and sad moment. Black Cat, she's in a relationship with him. She gets a phone call, and it's Peter. And he's like asking for her help. He apparently had like a moment of, free will before the costume just interrupts and cuts him off, and it freaks her out. So she goes to Reed Richards like, you've got to help us. You've got to fix this. And he's like, I'm trying several different things, but she just doesn't want to hear it anymore. She's like, Mr. Fantastic, whatever, stuff it, she tells him. She's so sick of him failing. Obviously, it's a lot more complicated than that, but she's just so sad that the man she loves is, gone, and they can't help him. So she kind of turns her a crime and kind of follows, starts doing more bad stuff, but she's also throwing her riches that she steals to the public. She's just kind of acting out. But in the Marvel Universe here, there's always kind of other things going on. You got Hulk and Thor fighting with the Avengers going on. That always happens. And in this scene here, Doctor Strange is going to, because again, this is separate of the Spider-Man thing. It's just the other stories with the other characters are still happening. So, in a senseless rage, the Hulk leaps for Doctor Strange, and instead finds himself entering a dimensional rift the magician has conjured. So they're gonna teleport the Hulk somewhere. But Venom, not Venom, it's not Venom, doesn't actually exist, but the black symbiote costumed Spider-Man shows up, grabs onto the Hulk's leg, and flings him. I thought the energy and movement of this throwing panel worked really well, and especially that shot, the drawing, the figure work, the anatomy of him doing a quick flip kick into Doctor Strange's face and knocking him out. That looks so good. It's so great. And so the black costume Spider-Man turns to the Hulk. The Hulk lashes out, but it says here, but just as the prey knows when it's being stalked by the predator, the raging behemoth suddenly knows fear. Like, Hulk is a big raging dum-dum, but he's smart enough to understand that whatever this is, he's afraid of it. And it leaps after him. And look, again, that stuff just oozing off him. And this panel right here, I remember reading this as a young kid, and still to this day, that panel of him just jumping onto the Hulk and then that costume just oozing onto him. It's claustrophobic and scary. It's so creepy. It's so well done. And it's just, again, it's just a little tiny panel on the page. There's no big, giant Rob Liefeld type or Jim Lee type ridiculous Image Comics imagery. These are all just simple panel work, just simple storytelling. But man, Mark Bagley is just so good. And so as the costume oozes onto Hulk, it disengages from its previous host. There's Peter Parker's body. Boom. The Wasp shows up and finds him, and he's an 80-year-old man now. Basically, the costume like burned up his life force and left him a frail old man in, what, a matter of days, weeks, months, maybe? Turn back to the Hulk trying to pull this costume off. This is another panel with Hulk trying to rip it off and just growling. Just kind of claustrophobic and scary. Really neat. But if you remember, it took quite a while for this costume to take over Peter Parker, because Peter Parker's a strong-minded man. Well, the Hulk's a big raging dum-dum, as we've already established. So how long does it take to the costume to take over the Hulk? Instantly. Done. The entity needed no help at all. The creature has little problem gaining control of the Hulk's mind and gamma-powered body. These were another couple of panels where, in my mind, the memory of them, they were a lot bigger just because of the impact of them. And there's just these little tiny figures, like just little guys. But it tells the story exactly. And it's scary because now the costume has the possession of the Hulk's body and that basically limitless power. It's frightening. So they get Peter back at a hospital and they're talking about him. Peter's talking. He says, near as I can figure, the alien thrives on human adrenaline, especially that of superpowered beings. It kept forcing me to use my power so it could feast on it. When it had nearly used up all my energy, it made me come in search of the greatest source of raw power it could find, the Hulk, and then it just dumped me. And Thor is sitting here saying, like, if the Hulk wasn't such a easily mentally manipulated, Thor himself probably would have been next. So they're kind of, figuring out what's going on, but poor Peter Parker is an old and frail man now, and Felicia's pretty pissed off, and she's like, we need to do something about this. We can't just let this go. And Peter's like, I don't know what the answer is, but he's like, I've lost 50 years of my life. So that's sad. That's really sad. He decides to go see Aunt May, but he's not going to tell her who he is. How could he? But they have a little quick conversation, and he pretends like he's someone else, but he tells her that, I just want you to know that I knew Peter, and Peter wanted you to know how much he loves you, and leaves her with kind of a happy feeling, even though she hasn't seen Peter for a long time. And of course, Mary Jane's here, and this is just showing how the universe changes, where Peter and Mary Jane never become a couple. Cut to the next day in Avengers Mansion. Reed Richards is trying to catch up with Peter. goes into his little room where he's doing work, and Peter Parker, he's dead on the floor. He died of old age that night. So Peter's dead, just like that. Forgive my book here. We're at the center page of it, and this copy is center pages have come out. This is another scene. Again, these were some of my earliest books, and getting into the Marvel Comics and a lot of the extended characters for the first time. And another interesting character moment. It's just a simple thing, but they're at Peter Parker's funeral, and you have Thor, and he's like kneeling on the ground with his hand over his head, almost like he's weeping. Like the strongest one is overcome with sadness. And like, I thought that was such a great little character moment just by the drawing. Everyone else is kind of standing there, and you know they're all friends on varying levels and feeling different things, but Thor's kind of brought to his knees. I think that's a really neat character moment. Afterwards, everyone leaves and Felicia stays there. She's just sad. She's like, he's gone. What am I supposed to do? Time passes, and the Kingpin shows up. And she's like, she was surprised. She says, "You came?" He says, "Of course. My sincere thanks for the chance to pay my last respects to a worthy, if hopelessly naive foe." So they stand there quietly for a minute. Again, that was a very interesting kind of character moment. Like, Wilson Fisk shows up, and he's like, I hated him, but he was a worthy foe, and he came to pay his respects. Then he asked if he can offer her a lift, and she's like, "Man, go fuck yourself. I ain't gonna take a ride with you." And then she's like, "Yeah, actually, I do need a ride." So Reed Richards, he's digging through Peter Parker's notes that he was compiling on the symbiote, and he's notating how Peter was a crazy gifted scientist, and his future could have been amazing if he wouldn't have been killed prematurely. But with the research that they've done, Reed Richards is pretty confident he's put together a weapon that will kill the symbiote, and they might have to just resort to doing that. So they're just kind of debating on whether or not they should and what they need to do, but they get everyone together that they can, and they're going to go track it down. They end up at Mount Rushmore, and they all scatter. So you got Thor, a different version of Captain Marvel. I'm not sure who that is. Or Doctor Strange, probably. Vision, Human Torch, Reed Richards, of course, Scarlet Witch, and this guy, I can't remember his name, but it'll come up. Anyway, Thor is just sitting here kind of reminiscing for himself about how, his past, his life, fighting evil, demon monsters and stuff like that. And suddenly the ground just erupts underneath him, and it's the Hulk. And, the Hulk possessed by the costume. And he's saying, "Thor, you have found me as I planned." And so he starts lying through some bullshit. He's like, "I'm remorseful for what I did to Spider-Man. I didn't know I was hurting him until I was too late. But with this Hulk, I have a true symbiosis." And it's saying, the symbiote is saying here, "I am restoring Banner's mind in return for the Hulk's power. The Banner will not die. Instead, we both benefit, as will your entire planet, for there will be no more Hulk to menace it." So he's trying to tell him that maybe this is actually a good thing for everybody. Thor says, "Maybe you speak the truth, creature, perhaps not. That will be judged once you have been taken into custody." Venom Hulk says, "No, I will not be imprisoned again." Thor swears you will. Then Thor is a fool. Shoots his webbing. Webbing's not going to hurt Thor. He's like, "This is stupid. I can block this." And he's like, "Yeah, but I'm just doing that to distract you." So he punches him, sends him flying. And it clearly affected Thor. And once again, as I've said, an introduction to so many different things in this book. This might be the first book I've ever read with Thor. I was aware of his existence. My dad was a big fan of Thor when he was a kid, and he collected comics. So my dad would tell me about Thor. But I don't know that I've ever read any Thor comics previous to this. So I understand that he's a very powerful god. And here comes the, symbiote Hulk. And Thor throws his hammer at him. Boom, slams right into him. And I always like this. He's like, "To me, my hammer," and it comes back to his hand. I thought that was really well illustrated. I didn't quite know that he could do that. So this is my first introduction to that concept. But really cool. The costume is oozing off him, and then you see Bruce Banner lying on the ground, and maybe he is cured. Maybe the Venom, I keep calling him Venom. He's not Venom until he joins with Eddie Brock, but we all get the point. Whatever. I'll just keep calling him Venom. The symbiote, Venom, lying there on the ground. He's like, well, maybe the symbiote was telling the truth, but I guess I'll never know. He thinks they're actually both dead. He thinks the human and the symbiote are dead. And he holds up the costume, but then Banner, he notices, is alive, and he's so, grateful that, oh Jesus, like the symbiote's dead, but I didn't kill you. That's not on my conscience. And so another interesting Thor moment, especially for the introduction of him to me, makes me understand and like his character. But Bruce is like, oh shit, behind you, the costume, it's not dead. Boom, it's oozing onto Thor. And the costume is saying to him, I have all the power from the Hulk, Thunder God. I needed more. And the costume saying, I will now possess the power of a god. And once again, Mark Bagley drawn this oozing goo that is the symbiote. This panel right here looks really good. How Thor's trying to fight it off now. But it's just it's overwhelming him, crawling over his face. Another thing I didn't know that Thor could do, he taps his hammer twice on the ground, and he summons lightning. The idea is the lightning to zap it off him and hopefully kill it, distract it, something. But it doesn't affect the symbiote at all, but it weakens Thor. Reed Richards gets one of his blasters up there, hits him, doesn't affect the symbiote, but weakens Thor. He's like, son of a bitch, I'm going to have to use the death ray. I'm going to have to use the thing that will kill him. But I don't know if that will kill Thor or not either. And so he just holds on. He can't bring himself to do it. And in that moment of hesitation, the costume basically asserts control. I always thought this was a really neat costume design. This is something I actually want to draw up myself. Like Thor covered with that symbiote, but the big red cape. It's really creepy looking. And I think Mark Bagley drew that so well. That's a neat design element. So he's saying he's got to get away. He's got to go into hiding for just a little bit to let the bonding complete. Human Torch goes into the cave following him. Boom, he gets blasted out. Almost kills him. He's continuing to try to get away, and this version of Captain Marvel comes after him, and she's like pure energy, so she jumps inside of him, but he's able to redirect it out through the hammer. It makes you wonder how the symbiote possessed Thor would be able to hold the hammer if it's magically enchanted. He's not worthy. I wonder how that would work out. I'm sure that wasn't something they put too much thought into in this one-off alternate universe. Oh yeah, Star Fox is that one guy's name that was with them. Anyway, he grabs onto her, and they just keep talking like, basically, we're going to have to kill this guy. And Reed Richards is like, I have a different plan. I have an idea. Give me half an hour. If my plan doesn't work by then, we'll have no choice but to go in for blood. And this is another character moment, just a simple thing that made me really like Thor. He's sitting there, and the costume is trying to bond with him. And eventually, you get the idea that it's going to. But he's sitting there, and it's like you can tell that they're both kind of suffering and struggling. It makes me appreciate how strong Thor is and how indomitable his will is. Like, even the costume is like Thor's resistance is causing it to peel off, even if it's just his eyes a little bit. He's trying so hard. But the symbiote notices someone's coming. Another one of your friends have sent another victim to face me. I shall vanquish this one as easily as the others. So, symbiote Thor looks, and who does he see? Again, a lot of firsts in this book. This is the first time I ever saw or even heard of Black Bolt, leader of the Inhumans. I had no idea who the fuck this guy was. But most of us know who he is and what his powers are. And even the symbiote's like, that scares him because it's all about sonic vibrations that can hurt him and kill him. Well, that's his entire power set. Great little panel here. He leaps at him. That goo stuff is oozing off him. It looks so cool. And he just screams. And they're at Mount Rushmore and obliterates it, turns it to powder just because he screams. I had no idea what his power set was, but that was so cool. I thought that was so neat. I had no idea what that was about. So the dust settles. Thor's freed. He's weakened, but he's okay. And they're all coming up, and they're like, the costume is still alive. So Reed Richards is like, Dr. Strange is like, I can banish it to a dimension where it will never hurt anyone. We don't have to kill it. And so Doctor Strange starts doing a little magical spell, but from off to the side, boom, it gets zapped, vaporized. And they're like, it's dead. Now it's dead. Looks like he's holding a tricorder from Star Trek. Anyway, who did this? Felicia Hardy, Black Cat. She was so sick of them trying to preserve the life of the symbiote that killed people and probably would have gone killing. She's like, I killed it. It's a vampire. He's done. Don't even worry about it. It's because she got the technology from Wilson Fisk. He provided that to her. And as it says here in the rest of the story, she's saying here, he's dead. Peter Parker's dead, but you'll never know the price I just paid to see justice done. She throws down the gun, and it basically says that the Kingpin gave her the technology to give her the weapon to carry out the justice that she wanted to do. In return, she just has to be in the employ of the Kingpin forever. And that's how she chooses to go about the rest of her life. I thought these drawings down here were really good, especially that last panel. Like the subtle walking gesture, like the black outfit and the white hair and the wrist and boot things. It's kind of a silly costume if you were to imagine it in real life, but visually in a comic book, it looks pretty dang cool. And that's the end of the story. So I remember reading it and being kind of like super entertained and loved the book, but you're also like, I was kind of like a feeling of melancholy and sadness that Peter was dead. I hadn't realized how bad things could get. I didn't realize we could get to a point where like Wolverine eats babies, but I was so naive. But a great book, a great story, 28 pages of just condensed storytelling with great, perfect, classic artwork by Mark Bagley. He's so good. And even his artwork changed where to kind of go with the times and be more flashy with bigger panels and stuff like that, the way that they did not do in this type of stuff. But at the time, it's told so perfectly and so clearly and so effectively. I don't know how you could do any better. So Mark Bagley, he sits in the ranks of bad motherfuckers. Next issue. What if Vision had destroyed the Avengers? I was reading Spider-Man's and X-Men's, and the Avengers seemed to be like a bunch of pussies, and I didn't know really much about them, so I never read that book, and I don't have it, so we will not be looking at it because, well, we can't. Anyway, that's all. There's nothing else. Letters, pages, things like that. But this is one of my favorites from my earliest reading days. So many introductions to certain characters, introductions to the Venom symbiote and how powerful it could be, and all kinds of neat stuff in a great single what if book. So that's all I have for now. And as always, thanks for watching. Thanks for joining me. And we'll see you next time.